Hi students, I welcome you all to Obstetrics and Gynecology with Mackler. So in this module, from this module onwards, we are going to discuss a very important spectrum in gynecology, right? And that is going to be all about the cancer cervix. See, this cancer cervix is a very important topic from where question is asked not just in the competitive examination but even in the practical life. Cervical cancer is something which has to be given more consideration. People are not even aware of such cancers, right? So because of that fact, I feel that I have to discuss about this topic in very detail to you, because as a growing doctors, it is our responsibility to spread this awareness among the people about what is cervical cancer and what are the preventive methods which are available with us, right? So we are going to discuss about cancer cervix from this module onwards, right? So beginning of this topic is all about HPV virus, right? So let's discuss first about cancer cervix. So cervical cancer is the second most common cancer in women in India, right? The most common cancer to occur in females is breast cancer. So following the breast cancer, the second most common cancer, which accounts for about more than quarter of all the cancers which occurs in women, is cancer cervix. Is that clear? Okay. So while discussing about the causes of cancer cervix, the most important cause which leads to cancer cervix is human papilloma viral infection, right? So this is an infection caused by a virus and it is called as human papilloma virus, right? That is called as HPV virus. So in this module, we'll be discussing about the HPV virus in detail. Following in the subsequent modules, we'll be discussing about the gynecological procedures performed in the cervix and what are the pre-malignant lesions and what is cancer cervix, what are the management available and what are the preventive measures, what vaccines are available till date, and everything will be discussed further in detail. Okay. So now let's start with the HPV virus. So to begin with, first of all, HPV virus is a double-stranded DNA virus, right? It is a double-stranded DNA virus, very important, right? Okay. So we all know that HPV is a double-stranded DNA virus, but unlike the other virus, for this virus to undergo replication and proper growth, it actually needs a host. So a host is very important for the completion of life cycle for this virus. So this virus is dependent on intact squamous epithelium. So in any host where there is intact squamous epithelium, it is very important for this virus to undergo completion of its life cycle and replication. Is that clear? Yes. So for that reason, it requires an intact squamous epithelium from a host. So this virus is host dependent, unlike the other virus, right? So for the completion of its own life cycle, this HPV virus is going to require an intact squamous epithelium. So because of that reason, it is called as epitheliotropic. Since it is dependent on an epithelium, it is called as epitheliotropic. Is that clear? So HPV is a double-stranded DNA virus. For the completion of its own life cycle, it requires an intact squamous epithelium from a host. So because of that reason, it is dependent on epithelium. It is called as epitheliotropic. Now, once it requires an intact squamous epithelium, what are the other stages which are going to happen? So in order to complete its life cycle, it is going to bring about some changes in that intact squamous epithelium, and that changes are called as coilocytosis. So what do you mean by coilocytosis? Coilocytosis are the changes which the virus brings about in the epithelium, in the intact squamous epithelium. The HPV virus is going to cause some changes and it is called as coilocytosis. So this coilocytosis typically describes as about the presence of coilocytes. So in the intact squamous epithelium, in order to complete its life cycle, it is going to bring about some changes, and that is called as coilocytosis. The image which we are seeing here is the coilocyte. So the description of coilocyte is that it is either a superficial or an intermediate cell, right, with a hyperchromatic nucleus as you can see here, with an hyperchromatic nucleus which is as acentric in location, and it is surrounded by a halo, a perinuclear halo. So it is actually a superficial or an intermoderate cell with a hyperchromatic large nucleus which is acentric in location, surrounded by a perinuclear halo. So this is the description of the coilocyte. So now you can ask me, what is the characteristic feature of So the characteristic feature is actually presence of coilocytes. So presence of coilocytes tells us that HPV infection is present. Therefore, the characteristic feature of HPV infection is coilocyte. But not with the presence of coilocytes alone, you can't come to any conclusion that malignancy is present. No, it doesn't mean anything like that. But if coilocytes are present, it means that coilocytosis has happened and this patient has HPV infection. So the characteristic feature of HPV infection is coilocytes. Is that clear? Yes. Now, what are the cancers caused by human papilloma virus? So, as we all know, the most common cancer caused by HPV virus is cancer cervix. Only cervix? Do it cause any other cancer? Yes, it causes many other cancers as well. So, in that order, it can even cause vaginal cancer. It can also cause vulval cancer. And it can also cause oropharyngeal cancers. It can also cause penile cancer, and it can also cause anal cancer. So, HPV virus, human papilloma virus, causes several different cancers such as most commonly cancer cervix, vaginal cancer, vulval cancer, oropharyngeal cancer, penile cancer, and anal cancer. To be even more specific, cervix, vaginal, vulval occurs more commonly in female. And in males, oropharyngeal, penile cancer and anal cancer happens in male. So HPV causes cervical, vaginal, vulval, oropharyngeal, penile and anal cancer. Is that clear? Yes. So the image which you see here is the coilocyte. So presence of coilocyte, it signifies that this patient is having an HPV infection. Right? Okay. So now we'll discuss about the various genes which are present in the human papilloma virus, right? It is a double-stranded DNA virus and it has both early genes as well as late genes, okay? In the early genes, we have E1, E2, E6 and E7 viral proteins. Whereas in the late genes, we have L1 capsid protein and L2 capsid protein. Is that clear? Okay. So now let's discuss about the several different proteins, E1, E2, E6 and E7. Now this E1 and E2 is very important. Why? Because is that I told you this HPV infection requires intact squamous epithelium to complete its life cycle. But in order to undergo replication, it requires this E1 and E2 viral proteins. So for the proper viral replication, E1 and E2 viral proteins are required for the HPV virus. Is that clear? Yes. So just by completing its life cycle, it cannot bring about any cancer, right? For cancer to happen, the cell proliferation has to happen in an abnormal way. So only when the cellular proliferation happens in an abnormal way, cancer is going to result. So for that reason, the virus replication happens through the E1 and E2 viral proteins. Now you have the doubt that what is the E6 and E7? So E6, the major function is to inactivate the P53 gene, and E7 is to inactivate the retinoblastoma gene. So by inactivating this P53 and retinoblastoma genes, it will bring about the malignancy, right? Malignant change will happen by inactivating this P53 gene and the retinoblastoma gene. So E1, E2 is for viral replication, E6 is to inactivate the P53 gene, which is a tumor suppressor gene, and E7 is to inactivate the retinoblastoma gene. So by inactivating the P53 and the retinoblastoma gene, it will result in malignant change. Right? By inactivating the tumor suppressor gene, it is going to result in malignant changes. Right? Okay. So now we have discussed about E1, E2, E6 and E7. Now coming to late genes, we have L1 and L2. This L1 is the capsid protein, and this is the major capsid protein. Out of this L1 and L2, which is the major, L1 is the major capsid protein, whereas the L2 is the minor capsid protein. Is that clear? Major and minor capsid protein. Please remember this L1 because while discussing about the vaccination for cervical cancer, this L1, I will mention about this L1 in that module, right? So L1 is very important when we discuss about vaccination for HPV infection. Yes, vaccines are available in order to prevent from this HPV infections, right? It is the current trend and we will be discussing about this in the subsequent module. Is that clear? Okay. So now we have discussed about what is HPV virus and what are the different viral proteins and what are the cancers caused by it and what is the characteristic feature of HPV infection. Now, definitely this HPV has to have some subtypes, right? It has to have several subtypes, and these subtypes will lead to several different cancers as well. So what are the subtypes? Can we divide the subtypes into low risk subtypes and high risk subtypes? Yes. So low risk subtypes are HPV 6 and 11, right? 6 and 11. So let me give a gist here so that you might understand very well. So the subtypes which are available are 6, 11, 16, 18, 31, 33, 45, 52, 58, right? 6, 11, 16, 18, 31, 33, 45, 52, 58 is very easy to remember, students, right? So totally we have 9 subtypes. So we are now going to categorize this 9 subtypes into the low risk and the high risk. So out of this, the first 2 is going to be the low risk subtypes, right? So I'm going to write 6 and 11 as the low risk subtype. And what is this going to cause? 6 and 11 subtype is going to cause condyloma, right? Condyloma, which is also called as genital warts. The warts which occurs in the genital area, right? This wart is actually caused by HPV subtype 6 and 11. So since it causes genital warts or condyloma, it is a low risk subtype. Is that clear? Right? It can also cause laryngeal papillomas. Laryngeal papillomas. So condyloma or genital warts, it can also cause laryngeal papilloma, and the 6 and 11 are low risk subtypes. So what are the high risk subtypes? Apart from the 6 and 11, 16, 18, 31, 33, 45, 52, 58, all these are high risk subtypes, right? So let's write it here. 16, 18, 31, 33, 45, 52 and 58. All these are high risk subtypes. Is that clear? All these 7 are high risk subtypes. And what is going to cause? It is going to cause cervical cancer and the other cancers which I have listed earlier, like the vaginal cancer, vulval cancer, oropharyngeal cancer, penile cancer, anal cancer, and etc. Right? Okay. So now our discussion is all about the cervical cancer. We are not going to discuss about oral, anal, and penile now. Our discussion is entirely restricted only to the cervical cancer. So from this high risk subtypes, which is the most common subtype which causes the cervical cancer? So the most common HPV subtype causing cervical cancer is HPV 16. Right? HPV 16 is the most common HPV subtype causing the cervical cancer. Now, what is the second most common HPV subtype causing the cervical cancer? Second most common subtype is 18, HPV 18. As you can see here, first is 16, second is 18. So 16 is more common, 18 is second most common. But if in case the question states you which is the most specific HPV subtype causing cancer cervix, the most specific is going to be HPV 18. Right? The most specific HPV subtype causing cancer cervix is HPV 18, as well as the second most common HPV subtype causing the cancer cervix is also HPV 18, whereas the most common HPV subtype causing cancer cervix is HPV 16. So this HPV 16 is actually very important, right? Because this HPV 16 has an association with many other cancers as well. So what are those cancers? So this HPV 16 can cause the most common cancer cervix. As we all know, the most common cancer cervix. Apart from that, HPV can also cause, So HPV 16 causes more commonly cervical intraepithelial neoplasia. Cervical intraepithelial neoplasia 3. So I will tell you what are the premalignant lesions of cervix, but the CIN3, which is cervical intraepithelial neoplasia, is also type 3, is also a premalignant lesion of the cervix. So HPV 16 causes CIN3 followed by the most common cancer cervix. And it can also cause oropharyngeal cancers, and it can also cause anogenital cancers. So oropharyngeal cancer, anogenital cancer, cancer cervix, cervical intraepithelial neoplasia type 3, all these are caused by the HPV 16 subtype. Therefore, HPV 16 subtype is even more important, right? So this was all about the subtypes and its discussion, right? So now what are we going to do is that we are going to discuss about what are the premalignant lesions of the cervix. So in the subsequent module, when we discuss about the gynecological procedures, as the result of those procedures are the premalignant lesions of the cervix, and these premalignant lesions are cervical intraepithelial neoplasia type 1, 2, 3, right? Finally, carcinoma in situ and invasive cervical cancer. So carcinoma in situ and invasive cervical cancers come under the category of cancer, but the CIN1, 2 and 3 comes under the premalignant lesions, right? Premalignant lesions of cervix. Of here, the most important thing you need to remember here is all about CIN1. I told you coilocytosis is the most common or is the most important characteristic feature of HPV infection. So if a patient has HPV infection which causes coilocytosis, she belongs to CIN1. So CIN1 means coilocytosis. So the process of coilocytosis, where the coilocytes are found, corresponds to cervical intraepithelial neoplasia type 1. So this cervical intraepithelial neoplasia type 1, 2 and 3 are the premalignant lesions of the cervix. So let me give a small gist about this CIN1, 2 and 3. So one is that out of the entire thickness of the cervix, dysplasia, that is abnormal cell growth and proliferation, is limited to less than 1/3 of the cervical thickness. If it is going to involve 1/3 to 2/3 of the cervical thickness, it is going to be known as cervical intraepithelial neoplasia type 2. If it is involves more than 2/3 of the cervical thickness, it is cervical intraepithelial neoplasia type 3. Is that clear? Yes. Now what is carcinoma in situ? Carcinoma in situ is when the cervix, like let's say for example this is the cervix, and up to 2/3 of the cervix dysplasia has occurred. Because of that reason it is called as CIN3. Now what is the major fact which make it as carcinoma in situ? Carcinoma in situ means that the cancer has involved the entire cervix. The dysplasia has involved the entire cervix, and the overlying membrane of the cervix is going to be intact. So let me show in a separate diagram for you so that you don't have any confusion as well. So let's say for example this is the cervix. So this is the overlying membrane of the cervix, and this is the entire cervix. So if the dysplasia, that is the abnormal cell growth and proliferation, is going to involve less than 1/3 of the cervical thickness, it is CIN1. If it involves 1/3 to 2/3, it is known as CIN2. If it involves 2/3, it is called as CIN3. If it is going to involve the entire cervical thickness, the entire area with the membranes intact, it is called as carcinoma in situ, right? But if it is going to cause any breach in this overlying membrane, right, there is going to be some breach in the overlying membrane, and this dysplasia is going to involve here. So if the overlying membrane of the cervix is going to get breached, it is called as invasive. Since it has invaded the overlying membrane of the cervix, it is called as invasive cervical cancer. So CIN1, 2, 3 are deeply malignant lesions of the cervix. CIN1 corresponds to coelocytosis, and CIN3 is caused by HPV subtype 16. So this was all about the human papilloma virus, and I hope I made the discussion very sweet, right, very clear, and it was very short, because all I want is not a lengthy lecture. I don't want you make so much evaporated with so much of content, but I want you to remember the important facts, and I want you to have a detailed knowledge about the cancer cervix. So now we have discussed about the human papilloma virus in this module. In the next module, we'll be discussing about the gynecological procedures performed in the cervix to detect the cancer cervix, and what are the screening procedures, and what are the diagnostic methods available for the detection of cancer cervix, followed by the CA cervix and its management and the vaccines in order to prevent people from HPV infection as well. Is that clear? If you have any doubt regarding this, please write to us in the Mackler handle. I hope I am writing to you as early as possible, and I received so much of response, and I'm still trying to push hard to make the videos more concise and in a very short duration, and with much loaded knowledge and important points needed for the examination, right? So until then, please keep studying. Let's meet in the next module.